The main character accidentally confuses a suitcase at the airport, finding millions of dollars of criminal origin inside. This discovery turns his life upside down, but the situation is aggravated by his wife, whom he trusted the most. She is cheating on him.
Damn. Money. Far too much money. That was exactly what I needed the most and what I least wanted to receive, at least not in this manner. I had anticipated finding the usual worn-out socks, t-shirts, and pants. Instead, I came across cash, a significant amount of it. Shit. Who on earth would own a small turquoise suitcase besides me? I never even gave it a second glance before grabbing it at the airport. It was so unattractive that it was embarrassing to be seen with. The color was so hideous that after a brief period of excitement, even my wife insisted that I should be the one to use it. We were heavily in debt, a situation worsened by her shopping habits and my limited income, so getting rid of the suitcase was out of the question. Time and again, I hoped it would finally break from my rough handling and that of the airport staff, but stubbornly, it refused to give up. The bright side was that it stood out like a beacon of tacky ugliness on any baggage carousel, and I was fairly certain no one would ever steal it. What I didn't anticipate was finding a second one identical to it. Yet, that's exactly what happened. This suitcase wasn't mine. Some other unfortunate person had clearly been a victim of a shopaholic spouse, and I had mistakenly grabbed his luggage. For some odd reason, I felt a moment of relief, thinking I was finally rid of mine. With that damn suitcase, I had lost my favorite Banana Slugs t-shirt and some of my tools. Instead, I ended up with $100 bills. My tools were quite heavy, and my employer was accustomed to covering the extra weight since he was too stingy to let me fly business class. I was used to carrying around 30 kilos, so when I grabbed it from the baggage carousel, the weight felt just right. A quick search on my phone revealed that 30 kilos of cash amounted to roughly $3 million. Damn. How could any respectable criminal organization employ someone who could lose an ugly turquoise suitcase containing a few $1,000,000? If that moron had done his job properly, I wouldn't be facing this predicament. There was no way this money was legitimate. No one transports millions in such an ugly suitcase. This cash was undoubtedly as tainted as an old man's joke, and I suspected the owners weren't known for their manners or sense of humor. The money and I were in close proximity, and if the owner discovered us this way, I'd be dead, and he'd get his money back. I didn't mind returning the money, but the idea of being killed was far from appealing. The dilemma was quite unique. What to do with an excess of money? Just dispose of it somewhere? What if I had been recorded by a security camera? Someone like Greasy Tony or One-Eye Luigi might come looking for me. While I was stuck with concrete feet and teeth scattered on the floor, they could be disastrously disappointed to find out I had dumped their money to get rid of it. No, disposing of it wasn't an option. What about returning it? To whom exactly? It seemed crucial to approach the right guy. Hey, you look like a criminal. Would you mind taking $3 million from me? Would probably result in a positive response. Still, Greasy Tony wouldn't appreciate that either. The only solution appeared to be keeping it. Use it to buy myself protection? Number. The only way was to not use it at all. Nobody must ever know I had it. More importantly, it might save me a few fingers or my life if it remained untouched when Greasy Tony came after me. Frantically, I tried to recall if my own suitcase contained any information about my identity, but nothing came to mind. Slowly, I closed the suitcase again, not even wanting to look at the money, and wondered how I would perform my job without my tools and where I'd find a toothbrush. Vinny mentioned, my car requires a new gearbox. Such distress. You should finally address that leaking faucet. Absolute misery. I despised being on the highway. The constant dripping is driving me nuts. I also loathed coming back home. Why did I continue living anyway? Was it just laziness? Clara's husband takes care of these issues immediately. Clara's husband mostly stays home while I'm working tirelessly. Bringing that up again wouldn't change anything. I was certain of that. I had attempted it. I was truly adept at being unhappy. It was the one thing I genuinely excelled at. You contribute nothing to our relationship, nothing at all. Naturally, arguing was pointless. Years ago, I briefly thought about recording our conversations so I could play them back instead of engaging in dialogue. I didn't believe that would help, so I usually chose to remain silent instead. I'm heading to Clara's. Try to get something done around here for a change. That's how my loving wife greeted me. Not with a welcome back or I've missed you, just the typical squabbling. Of course, I wasn't exactly warm toward her either. We had one of those troubled relationships where neither of us could recall how things went wrong. Yeah, I've missed you too, I responded sarcastically. Stop the nonsense. My wife, the last of the true romantics. The sound of the door closing mercifully ended the unpleasant exchange. Sighing, I walked toward the kitchen. I grabbed an empty glass, the same one every time. 3 ice cubes, Diet Coke, the small black bowl, potato chips, always in the exact same spot on the sofa, the Coke on the corner of the small table, the chips right beside it. Next was the remote, always neatly arranged. I stared at it and felt nauseous. Maybe I was losing my mind. Who leads this kind of life? Repeating the same things over and over. It wouldn't be so bad if it didn't make me feel so miserable. I couldn't shake the thoughts about the suitcase. Could it be my ticket out of this living nightmare? Sure, I'd be risking my life, but was risking the existence I called life really that terrible? Sometimes I wished I were dead anyway. The problem was, while I didn't enjoy living, I feared dying. No, the suitcase wasn't a solution. It was just another issue. Damn, I needed to remember to hide it. It couldn't stay in my trunk. Half an hour later, I returned to the sofa, feeling better. The old treehouse, abandoned by previous tenants and which Doris had incessantly nagged me to dismantle, was the perfect hiding spot. It was absurdly high in a massive tree, so I never got around to actually removing it. I felt good about that hiding place and the broken routine of my life. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of excitement. 3,000? Are you serious? For a freaking gearbox? Unfortunately, yes. Doris was in a pretty calm mood that morning, and I didn't want to cause any unnecessary tension. I had no idea how we were supposed to come up with that kind of money, but she seemed to at least recognize the issue instead of just throwing it my way. What about Vinny? Could he help? I suggested. Vinny was Doris's cousin. In my opinion, he was a complete jerk. He was a large guy and went out of his way to maintain his hostility towards me at all times. He also owned a shabby auto repair shop. Whenever I asked for something, I was sure he would inflate the family price by 10%. However, he liked Doris, perhaps a little too much, so she might be able to convince him to assist. That's already Vinny's rate. Damn it. A new gearbox. We had no money at all, except for the modest $3 million in cash stored in the old treehouse. All our problems would be solved if I just used it, but that might also end my life. Number, I couldn't do that. My life might not be worth much, but hopefully more than a Miata gearbox. Look, I'll try to find a used one on eBay. All we need is Vinny's car lift and maybe a bit of advice and a helping hand. He won't be happy about that. Yeah, he probably wanted to take advantage of our bad luck to make some money. I'll see what I can do. Damn, it was obvious he was keeping an eye on me. He acted like he was just organizing shelves at our local supermarket. I have to admit, he was impressive, handling the packages as if it were second nature. But I saw through his act. Where was the usual shelf stacker? Typically, they'd have a skinny kid for the job. This guy was dark-skinned and muscular. What had happened to the original? I pictured his body hidden somewhere in the woods and felt sorry for the kid. I swiftly grabbed the few items I was supposed to collect and exited the store as quickly as possible, trying to appear calm and composed. In the parking lot, I immediately spotted another unfamiliar face. He was tossing paper into a dumpster, but like the shelf-stacking guy, he kept an eye on me as discreetly as possible. Had they sent a duo of hitmen, or were these guys just surveilling me? Shit, I was on the verge of losing it. No respectable mafia assassin would waste time stacking shelves or taking out the trash just to eliminate someone insignificant like me. They would simply get it done, shoot me, and then move on to whatever mundane activities those guys were doing in their spare time. Still, the underlying panic was hard to shake, and I kept glancing at my rearview mirror on the drive home. "Thank you so much, honey," Doris exclaimed warmly as soon as I handed over my purchases. That stunned me even more than the mysterious men at the supermarket. Doris was being kind to me. Why now? Could it be a coincidence? Unlikely, but how could she possibly know about the money? How was I supposed to react? I wasn't accustomed to peaceful interactions at home anymore. "It was my pleasure, honey," I responded, attempting to sound genuine. We both delivered Oscar-worthy performances, pretending not to understand what was happening, which wasn't far from the truth in my case. There was only one plausible explanation for such a sudden change in demeanor. She definitely hadn't just rekindled her love for me. She was aware of the money and wanted to find out its whereabouts. "Do you want an omelet and orange juice for breakfast?" "Okay." We were now deep into the twilight zone. "Oh, that would be wonderful, sweetheart," I answered, striving to sound loving and not overly confused. Things continued like this, which turned out to be more stressful for me than the usual complaining or the potential hitmen lurking in the supermarket. Later, when I was sitting in front of the TV, she surprised me again by trying to sit right next to me. It took a lot of willpower not to pull away. I wasn't used to close contact with others anymore. I didn't know how to handle it. I could deal with her being bitch by ignoring her. That was our typical approach. Being nice required much more effort, but I tried. I really did. "Michael," she began and then paused, clearly searching for the right words. "I know things haven't been easy between us lately. Don't think it's been all your fault." I just looked at her, nodding slightly. She seemed empathetic and caring, like the Doris from the distant past. "We started off so well, and I truly thought you were the one," she continued. "Something went wrong along the way, and I don't even know what. Work, worries, everyday life. I'm not sure." I nodded again in agreement. "Sadly, yes, I feel the same way. I never wanted us to drift apart like this." "Don't ever think that I didn't love you." I noticed she used the past tense. "I just can't see a way out of this endless cycle. It has worn me down, changed me, and it's changed you too." I pondered her words for a moment and appreciated her giving me that space. Unfortunately, my reflection led to no conclusions. "Do you think it can be saved?" I finally asked, unsure if I even wanted an answer. "No," she replied, sounding genuinely sad. "It's too late for that. We can still live together and try to improve things. We can attempt to be nicer, but that burning love won't return." That was harsh, but she was probably right. "You can do that? Continue living with me without love? Please don't think I don't care about you. I can easily see myself living with you for a little longer. I think I'm looking for a break, a way to escape this endless repetition. I just wish we had found that way together." "You just don't love me anymore, right?" "Not anymore, no. I won't apologize, as I'm sure you feel the same." I nodded, and we simply sat together, staring blankly at the TV. It was a meaningful moment. For the first time in what felt like forever, we felt connected again, both aware that it might be our last time together. I still wasn't sure if she knew anything about the money, but at that moment, I doubted it. I hoped she wasn't being cold or calculating, but was just going through an unusually calm period. Maybe she also sensed that our relationship was ending, and this was her way of saying goodbye. After a while, she placed a comforting hand on my shoulder, a simple gesture that carried a sense of familiarity. It reminded me of the connection we once shared. The entire situation left me reflective, caught between the past and the present. We both seemed to understand that our relationship had run its course, and it was time to part ways. We moved to a quieter space where we talked about the good memories and the challenges we had faced together. The dim lighting in the room seemed fitting for the tone of our conversation, solemn but peaceful. As we spoke, I found myself reminiscing about what had brought us together in the first place. The laughter, the shared dreams, and the moments of unspoken understanding all came rushing back. There was a sense of closure in the air, a silent acknowledgement that this chapter of our lives was ending. Despite everything, I felt grateful for the time we had shared and for the lessons we had learned along the way. We embraced briefly, holding on to the warmth of the moment before letting go. Eventually, we parted ways with mutual respect, each of us ready to move forward on our own paths. The memory of that evening stayed with me, not as a moment of loss, but as a reminder of the value of genuine connection and the importance of cherishing the time we have with those we care about. I absolutely despised that blasted auto repair shop. It was perpetually gloomy inside. Sure, there were windows, but the last time they had been clean was back when the place first opened, decades ago. Now the windows were merely a slightly lighter shade of brown than the surrounding walls. The space was cluttered with all sorts of junk, primarily tires and risque calendars. There were items I couldn't recognize, and I doubted anyone else could either. Walking in felt like stepping into a strange, sacred place. It wasn't exactly off limits, but I definitely wasn't welcome. I never managed to determine how many guys were employed there. They seemed to appear and disappear constantly, and I was pretty certain there were somewhere between 4 and 10 of them. It didn't help that they all looked nearly identical. Short, cropped hair, bulky muscles, and tattoos. All that was missing were some window bars, making it resemble a high-security prison. There was only one car lift and a single tire mounting machine. I couldn't understand why so many men worked there or what they did all day, but I suspected most of it wasn't entirely legal. Everything looked cheap and worn out. There was no way all those guys could make a living with such equipment. The backyard was vast, resembling a wooded parking lot. Some cars seemed like they hadn't been moved since the Stone Age, while others were constantly being changed. None of them had price tags or any signs indicating they were for sale. Many looked far too expensive for such a run-down place. I stuck to my usual policy of don't ask. Upon entering the shop, I saw Vinny standing with 2 other guys near the tire machine. As usual, no one seemed to be working or bothered by that fact. Earning money through manual labor didn't appear to be a priority. Everyone completely ignored my presence. I stood there in the middle of the shop like a clueless fool. God, I couldn't stand those power plays. Eventually, Doris walked in, and Vinny took a sudden interest in her. As usual, his attention was mostly on her cleavage. She never seemed to mind and always dressed provocatively. I never complained, since we typically needed something from him whenever we saw him, and I understood why she acted that way. After about 30 minutes of being either ignored or rudely spoken to, I finally got to work on the damn Miata. As expected, nobody offered any help, not even Doris, but at least I could use the car lift and the tools. My wife was busy talking to the guys in Vinny's office. Miraculously, their number had grown from 3 to 4, and I had no idea where the extra guy came from or who he was. The office was separated from the shop by what used to be glass. I suspected that even if the glass were removed now, the grime alone would suffice. The density of risque pictures inside was even higher, and with 5 people, the space was completely packed. They were engaged in animated conversation until they abruptly stopped and all turned to look at me. A chill ran down my spine. Damn it. The money. They somehow knew about the money. I knew they were all some kind of criminals, so why had I even come here? These guys seemed to have a 6th sense for such things. Suddenly, they resumed talking, but kept glancing in my direction occasionally. At that moment, I much preferred their previous indifference. I continued working on the damn car, trying to act as if nothing was wrong. Nice car. I jumped in surprise and cut my hand on a hose clamp. There was a guy standing right behind me. How the hell had such a large, muscular brute managed to sneak up on me like that? His grin revealed a few gold teeth and distorted the large scar that ran across his mouth. A significant piece of barbed wire was tattooed above his brow. To me, it looked as unappealing as the massive spider tattoo on his bare stomach, or the tears under both eyes. The guy must have been nearly 2 meters tall. All his body fat seemed concentrated in a potbelly, with the rest being pure muscle. Overall, he looked terrifying. To any alien landing in that shop, we would appear as two completely different species. "What?" I croaked, hating how frightened it sounded. "Nice car," he repeated patiently, as if he was accustomed to talking to idiots. Why was he commenting on the car? It wasn't nice. It was just a broken old Miata, worth less than one of his teeth. "Oh, thanks." He looked pleased that he had finally gotten through to the fool. "Gearbox trouble?" All right. I was certain he knew about my money by then. There was no way he could be genuinely interested in my gearbox problem. Sensing a trap in his questions, all I could do was nod silently. "You're not the talkative type, are you?" Oh my God. He couldn't have been any clearer. If I wasn't willing to talk, he would make me. He was definitely some kind of expert in intimidation and manipulation. Sorry," I said, shrugging my shoulders to buy some time. "I'm having trouble with this bolt." "Try heating it, buddy." He then patted me on the back, startling me, and left the shop. What had just occurred? I glanced back at the office and saw Doris pointing at me while everyone laughed. Was it because I had embarrassed myself, or because they were already taking my money? Wait, did I just refer to it as my money? Seriously? I had to remind myself that my main goal was still to dispose of it without getting myself killed in the process. After a while, Doris joined me by the car but steered clear of touching any tools. "When will you be done?" The new Doris was back in action, impatient, ungrateful, demanding, as if nothing had happened the previous night. "Doris, I'm just a vending machine technician. No one here is offering to help me, and I have no real idea how to handle this. Try to have it fixed by evening, okay? I'd like to visit Monica tomorrow morning for a late breakfast." Wow, even for Doris, that was an unusual tone. What about helping me? Of course, she dismissed that ridiculous idea. "You know what? Vinny mentioned a way to make some money. Remember that beautiful turquoise suitcase I gave you? Well, someone is looking for one just like it and is willing to pay for leads." My blood ran cold instantly, and I was sure Doris noticed. What? Why would someone pay for such a... I almost said ugly thing, but that wouldn't be wise. For a suitcase like that? I don't know, and it might be better not to ask too many questions if you catch my meaning. There seems to have been some kind of mix-up at the airport. Are you sure you picked up the right one? There can't be too many like it around. Sure, my clothes and tools were in it, so it had to be mine. I see. By the way, where is yours anyway? I couldn't find it this morning. Damn, she had already started looking for the money. The deal was truly off. The only question was whether she had already sold my life. In my trunk. She nodded approvingly and smiled before adding, "Glad to hear it, honey. Glad to hear it," she repeated, sweet as honey. "It just seems the other one contained some tools, just like those a vending machine technician would need." Damn, I was done for. She definitely knew what was happening. That was fast. I expected to be discovered eventually, but not that soon, and certainly not by my own wife. Just out of curiosity, how much are they willing to pay, honey? How much was my life worth? 200 grand, honey. That's a lot of money. Shit. She had already sold my life. I was certain now. 200,000 was far too much for Doris to pass up. So what do we do now, Doris? How do we handle this? We don't need to do anything, honey. Please have this fixed by evening, okay? This? The suitcase, the car, or my miserable life? The car, honey. The car. Sure, honey. With that, she simply turned and left, leaving me feeling abandoned and disoriented. We had driven my car to get here, and I still had the keys, so I wondered how she planned to get home. I was utterly stunned. With no one around to help, I glanced around and realized I was completely alone. How had things escalated to this point? All right, time to assess the situation. First, I needed to stay calm and focus. Second, going to the authorities didn't seem like an option. I wasn't sure they would believe me or even be able to help. My only asset was money, and I realized I might need it to get out of this mess quickly. But how does someone disappear entirely? I had no idea. I was just a vending machine technician. Still, it seemed like my best option. Then there was Doris. I still wasn't sure if she had betrayed me. Could I really leave her behind? What if she hadn't said anything to Vinny? I needed to find out the truth without putting myself in danger. I slipped out of the shop carefully, using the roll-up door to avoid detection. The area was eerily deserted. The small parking lot behind the building was empty, which only added to my unease. Why had everyone vanished so suddenly? Were they waiting for instructions from someone nearby? It was plausible. A confrontation seemed inevitable, but I wasn't ready to face it yet. As I moved stealthily, I spotted a run-down caravan that seemed out of place. It looked as though it had been abandoned for years, covered in dirt and leaves. The windows were tinted and grimy, giving no hint of what was inside, except for one slightly ajar. I didn't trust Vinny, and the caravan only amplified my suspicion. Still, my curiosity got the better of me. I crept closer, keeping myself hidden, and peeked through the open window. What I saw confirmed some of my worst fears, though not in the way I had expected. Inside, Vinny was holding court, clearly enjoying his perceived dominance in the situation. Doris, however, seemed detached and indifferent, her demeanor cool and unreadable. It was as if they were playing a psychological game, one I didn't understand. The dynamic between them was strange, unsettling even. It seemed more like a battle of control than anything else. It dawned on me that whatever connection they had was rooted in something I would never comprehend. Maybe it was power, maybe convenience. Either way, I realized it wasn't my concern anymore. As I backed away from the scene and returned to the shadows, I knew one thing for certain. It was time to leave this chapter of my life behind. Doris and Vinny could have each other if that's what they wanted. I had my own path to carve out, and it was clear I wouldn't find it here. I decided to leave the Miata and its faulty gearbox at its new location, Vinny's garage. It was no longer my problem. I briefly wondered if Vinny could loosen that stubborn bolt by heating it, but that wasn't my priority anymore. The most pressing issue was staying safe. Where could I hide? How could I secure the money without endangering myself? Were there really people out there who could help someone start over with a new identity, like in those crime dramas? How could I even find them? Did I need some kind of protection? I didn't have many advantages, but one was my inconspicuous car. I drove an older Toyota Corolla that hadn't been washed in years. Even Doris would have trouble recognizing it. To her, it was just a nondescript car sitting in the driveway, and she never paid it any attention. Vinny probably didn't even know such cars existed. It blended into the background like nothing else. I decided to buy some supplies, hide my car behind a supermarket dumpster, take a moment to calm down, and wait for nightfall. The wait felt endless, especially as I imagined Vinny and Doris searching the house in vain for the money. The downtime forced me to confront some harsh truths. My life was in shambles. The fact that I wasn't more alarmed about the danger I was in said a lot about my state of mind. The strained relationships and chaos in my life had worn me down for years. Yes, things were bad, and I had ignored that reality for far too long. But now I was finally taking action, even if circumstances had forced my hand. No matter what happened next, one thing was certain. I couldn't go back to living the way I had been, and for the first time in a long while, that gave me a glimmer of hope. I reflected on how life once controlled me and tainted my aspirations. At one time, Doris and I were passionately in love. She was entirely different then, and I suppose I was too. She was lively, compassionate, engaged, and brimming with energy and hope. I was driven, considerate, and affectionate. What happened to that? It happened slowly and stealthily. I should have realized it, but I didn't. Our love gradually faded away, unnoticed and ungrieved, until one day, in a single moment, I understood that we were essentially dead, merely existing, going through the motions without truly living. We never addressed it, but it felt like each of us blamed the other. Consequently, we distanced ourselves further, each waiting for the other to make the first move, trying to punish when it never happened. To escape the tension, I threw myself into work, even insisting on traveling as much as possible. I despised it, but I loathed being at home even more. She responded by honing her unbearable bitch facade. I realized it might have been her desperate attempt to reach out to me. However, it didn't matter. It was far too late to mend anything, even back then. Eventually, intimacy became a tool of manipulation. She would withhold it, and I responded by becoming indifferent. The dynamic shifted until we were living like siblings. Eventually, we turned into adversaries. Money became a major source of conflict. She became increasingly fixated on it. At one point, she insisted on staying home, likely to put more pressure on me. In response, I chose a career path that eliminated any possibility of advancement. We were a thoroughly dysfunctional couple. Someone should write a book about us, though I suspected our story wasn't that unique after all. Did I grieve for losing Doris? Strangely, I didn't. I mourned the loss of our shared dreams, the life we might have had, and how we ruined it all for a trivial power struggle. I didn't mourn losing her as a person. In the end, it was dark outside, and I was freed from my unpleasant thoughts. I felt like a voyeur, crouched behind a bush in the darkness, spying on a house. In this case, it was my own place, specifically Vinny's, and it was unlit. It could either be a setup, or Doris was still basking in the comfort of Vinny's caravan. After an hour, I realized that continuing to watch wouldn't reveal anything new. I had two options: go inside or leave. The issue was, I had nowhere to go and no solid plan. I needed at least my money and a few personal items. This meant accessing the backyard, likely triggering any traps they might have set. For someone who had contemplated suicide for years, I was acting surprisingly cowardly. I finally decided to just deal with it, choosing to enter the house through the back door with a bit of finesse. If it had only been Doris insisting, trying to spite her, I probably never would have fixed the squeaky door. But it had annoyed me enough a few weeks earlier to do so. I appreciated my own thoughtfulness and the WD-40 as it allowed me to enter the house silently, like a ghost. Well, I would have, if I hadn't stepped on one of Doris's Amazon packages that the delivery guy had placed right behind the usually unlocked back door. Some bubble wrap popped, signaling my presence to whatever army was lying in wait to ambush me. Still, everything stayed quiet. I stood in the darkness with my heart pounding, barely managing to keep my composure. Nothing happened. Fortunately, I knew my way around the house and made it to the bedroom without any further incidents. My plan was to grab a few spare clothes in the almost complete darkness and disappear before anyone realized what was happening. I found my gym bag, which had never been used for its intended purpose, and threw it onto the bed. Next, I grabbed a few pairs of socks. I tried to locate the bag in the darkness to place the socks inside. Instead, I felt what was unmistakably a foot. Startled, I jumped back a bit, knocking over the hideously ugly floor lamp Doris had bought just to spite me. With my heart racing, I waited for someone to come investigate the noise and potentially kill me in the process. I really hadn't expected to find a foot in my bed. More importantly, the person didn't react at all to being touched. Okay, my perfect stealth operation was ruined. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. Doris. She was lying in the bed, which wasn't unusual by itself since it was her bed, after all. However, the scene was unsettling. For years, she had gone to great lengths to maintain her privacy, even during our last days together. Now, her lifeless body told a story of something far more sinister. This was not the moment to linger on past memories, but my mind wandered. I felt a faint sorrow seeing her like this, though grief didn't overwhelm me. I couldn't decide whether my lack of emotion was troubling or justifiable. My thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps on the stairs. Someone unfamiliar with the creaky floorboard was approaching, and that fact alone sent a chill down my spine. I quickly turned off my flashlight and moved to a shadowy corner, hoping the darkness would hide me. Moments later, the overhead light flicked on, revealing a figure. It was him, a man I recognized from the repair shop. He gave me a strange, almost cordial look. "So," he said, "did you loosen that bolt?" "No," I replied, my voice barely audible. "You're still not much of a talker, huh?" "What happened to Doris?" I asked, surprising myself with the question. It wasn't relevant anymore, but I couldn't stop myself. "Just business," he said matter-of-factly. "The boss calls the shots." "And you just carry them out?" "Sometimes. Sometimes he takes care of things himself," he said, glancing briefly at the bed. I stared at the rumpled sheets, wondering what had led to this tragic outcome. My mind spun, imagining the chain of events that had reduced her life to a cold transaction. "So, it was just easier to, end things?" I ventured, trying to keep him talking, a tactic I had seen in countless movies. "Right. Like I said, just business." "What happens now?" I asked, my voice trembling. He stepped closer. "More business." His calm demeanor unnerved me. For a moment, he set his weapon down on the nearby table. It struck me as odd. Was he trying to avoid drawing attention? Perhaps he didn't want to disturb the neighbors. My mind flashed to Mrs. Anderson down the hall, a kind but nervous woman who didn't need more stress in her life. "Nothing personal," he added, as if that made any of this easier to accept. He grabbed me by the neck, his grip tightening while I struggled to react. My arms flailed, searching for anything I could use. My fingers brushed against something familiar and solid, a snow globe, one Doris had cherished despite my dislike for it. With no time to think, I swung it toward him. The heavy object connected with his head, accompanied by a dull thud. His grip loosened, and I gasped for air as he stumbled backward. Another muffled sound followed as he hit the floor, motionless. For a moment, the room was silent. I stared at the snow globe, still clutched in my hand, its contents swirling as if mocking the chaos around me. I appreciated the understated and often overlooked comfort of being able to take a few breaths before noticing another pool of blood seeping from yet another head. It seemed like dying in my bedroom was becoming commonplace, so I decided to leave before I became part of that pattern. I quickly got back to packing, a process sped up by the light that heated bolt guy had turned on. I swiftly gathered some potentially important documents and even took his gun. I had never felt the need to own one before, but it seemed wise when being pursued by a prohibited substances cartel or whoever else. After that, I did the obvious thing. I took stock of my life. I was a widower, a murderer, had lost everything, and all my possessions fit into a single large gym bag. Surprisingly, I felt good. At that moment, all I needed was a few million in cash, which I happened to have. Suddenly I panicked, realizing I hadn't checked if they had discovered it. When I hid the money, the location seemed brilliant, but now it appeared embarrassingly obvious. I hurried back out the back door after stepping on that cursed package once more and quickly climbed the massive tree, using the remnants of the steps a previous tenant had nailed to it. There it was. The turquoise monstrosity had never looked more stunning than it did at that moment. I loved that thing. I briefly opened it to check if the money was still there before considering that they might have replaced it with a bomb. There I was again, the usual clueless fool with my typically ugly turquoise suitcase. I stood on the street, glancing back at what used to be my home. Walking away should have been simple. The place was rented. I disliked everything inside. We had no children, and there weren't many good memories. Inside what was once my bedroom, my wife lay dead in her own blood. We might have ended up hating each other. She had attempted to sell my life and cheated on me with her unattractive cousin. Still, she was the woman I once loved, the woman I wanted to share my life with, the woman I shared my dreams with. Clearly, something had gone wrong at some point, long before I obtained the damn money against my will. Things had derailed, and leaving like this felt like a monumental failure. I still couldn't understand why Vinny hadn't located the money. Either he didn't have enough time to search thoroughly, or he was even less sharp than I was. It didn't really matter in the end. What was important was that I still had the money, my life, and my Corolla. I quickly started the robust 4-cylinder engine and gently pushed the car down the street. Thinking of scenes from movies, I glanced in the rearview mirror to ensure no one was following me. I briefly considered the 2 bodies lying in my bedroom, but decided to leave that to Vinny. It was his house, and now it was his problem. I knew exactly what I needed to escape from, but unfortunately I had no idea where I wanted to go. I chose to drive aimlessly until I lost interest and ended up wherever that might be. South. I wanted to head south. I had always hated the cold, and it had only gotten worse as I got older. I momentarily thought about quitting my job but decided against it. I despised my boss almost as much as I hated my previous life in general, including the cold. Maybe this whole strange situation was for the best. I was essentially dead, but this final adventure might be just what I needed. Breakfast was, as always, a disappointing experience. The elderly woman who owned the inn repeatedly assured me that this place had once been a renowned international tourist destination. At that moment, there was no indication of that. The hotel was old and nearly dilapidated, overlooking what was called the lake, which resembled a large brownish puddle. Its main perks were accepting cash, not asking questions, and its extreme seclusion. Paying with cash was ideal for me since I had plenty and was comfortable using it. Keeping all my money was pointless. They wanted me dead anyway. I had concealed most of my cash in a new spot in the woods and only carried a few thousand with me. There were only a few guests, and I always wondered why they were there. They were all men, looked unhappy, and left in the morning only to return in the evening. I had no idea what they did during the day. I was unsure how to spend my own time. Somehow, I had imagined that being on the run from the mafia would be more exciting, stressful, and dangerous. Instead, I found myself endlessly wandering around the puddle and feeling bored the rest of the time. I always looked forward to the meals, not because they were good, but because they broke up the monotony. Still, the hotel provided a sense of relative safety, since I could immediately screen any new arrivals. I knew the men who were currently staying there, and they all seemed harmless. At that time, I was happy to trade boredom for a degree of safety. I didn't miss Doris at all. In fact, her absence felt like a burden lifted from my shoulders. I didn't even regret how she died. I briefly wondered if I should feel bad about my lack of concern, but remembering how she had deceived me helped. I checked the news for any information about her or someone who might be the heated bolt guy, but surprisingly, nothing showed up. It seemed the mob had managed to cover everything up. I suppose it helped that Vinny owned the house we were living in. After a few weeks, I found myself despising my new life nearly as much as the one I had before Doris's unfortunate death. Yes, her unpredictable mood swings were unbearable. I loathed my job, and everything had become incredibly monotonous. Still, at least something was happening, even if it was just a vending machine malfunctioning. The hotel by the lake started to feel like a prison. Additionally, people began to ask questions. It was clear I wasn't a tourist, and some, including the innkeeper, were growing curious. Up to that point, I had managed to dodge their inquiries, but the pressure was mounting. Because of this, I didn't slip into my usual paranoid worries when new guests arrived. I was relieved to have them help divert some of the unwanted attention. The newcomers were two men who arrived together, soon followed by a single woman. The woman might have been attractive if she had made an effort, but she clearly chose not to. She wore a hoodie, jeans, and sneakers, all well worn and indicative of limited funds. I felt a bit of pity for her. She was obviously there to hide from something or someone, just like me. However, the men caught my attention. They glanced at me briefly upon arrival and then quickly looked away. It was obvious they were sizing me up, but trying to be discreet about it. They failed. They were either gay or looking for someone, most likely me. So it had begun, I thought. At least the oppressive boredom was about to end, even though whatever excitement lay ahead probably involved my own downfall. I briefly wondered if I would meet Doris in hell, and the thought motivated me to stay alive. I acted immediately by retreating to my room and hiding there. Of course, I kept fumbling with the damn gun, not really expecting to stand a chance against two trained mafia hitmen. I waited for hours until lunchtime, but I could hardly stay hidden and began to starve in my room. A few days later, I had mostly regained my composure and was eager enough to look forward to interacting with the innkeeper and the staff. She was a kind woman, though exceedingly dull and somewhat delicate. I was taken aback to see her serving lunch and clearing the tables. I hadn't anticipated her doing physical work at her age. "George is out sick today, darn it," she muttered. As she was explaining her situation, the stack of plates she was holding began to tip dangerously toward me, as if gravity had already taken hold. I quickly moved in to steady them. "That wouldn't have been so bad if Pauline hadn't left to follow her ex-husband," she continued, without missing a beat. By then, I was essentially carrying the entire pile, which she barely seemed to notice. She finally released the plates entirely, allowing her to gesture with her hand to emphasize her predicament. Finding good workers these days is so hard. I tuned out, already familiar with the rest of her complaint. There was no work ethic anymore, meaning no one was willing to toil for a paltry wage. Her staff had shared their perspectives on the issue more than once. I just sighed and took the stack to the kitchen, where Joe the cook seemed to be under immense pressure. He appeared to see me as a lifesaver. After years with Doris, this was a welcome change. "Thank goodness you're helping, Michael. The old witch is slower than my broken-down old Yugo. Could you take these outside, okay? I really appreciate it." He pointed to a few plates that once held hot food. I simply shrugged, grabbed them, and carried them outside. Why not? I had worked as a waiter for some extra money years ago. I was bored anyway, and honestly, it felt good to help out. Of course, the two new guys smirked and made crude comments. However, the hooded woman gave me a strange look. If I hadn't known better, I might have thought her gaze was almost admiring. In any case, she smiled warmly, and once again, I thought how beautiful she would look if she didn't try to hide it. "Do you like it here?" the man asked, examining me without any hesitation. Could a hitman be so bold? On the flip side, what other reason might someone have to pose that question? Yeah, kind of," I responded, as non-committally as possible while pretending to be occupied with the sparse breakfast buffet. "Really, what are you doing in this dump?" He chuckled, disregarding the annoyed looks the innkeeper woman gave him. I figured he was either not a killer, a foolish one, or he was cleverly trying to make me believe he wasn't. "Working on installations at the steel plant like Joe and me?" "No, not the steel plant. I'm just, enjoying the scenery." So there was a steel plant nearby, which explained why anyone would be staying there at all. He laughed loudly, as if it were the funniest joke he'd ever heard. Scenery? There's scenery around here? I felt more at ease. The man was far too loud and obnoxious to be a mafia hitman. However, the other guy always stared at me too intensely. I needed to keep an eye on him. I opened my bedroom door, only to be startled as someone quickly stepped in front of me, completely catching me off guard. Before I could react, I was guided back into the room, and the situation grew tense. Two unfamiliar faces stood before me, their expressions stern and unyielding. I tried to steady my racing thoughts. These weren't people I recognized, and their sudden appearance in my space set off every alarm in my head. My hidden stash of money in the woods wasn't my primary concern anymore. It was figuring out what they wanted and how to defuse this situation. They spoke in low, commanding tones, clearly wanting answers. One of them stepped closer, making their intentions clear. They were after something valuable. I had to think on my feet. Look, I said, trying to maintain my composure. If this is about the money, I don't see why helping someone else would be in my best interest. One of them seemed momentarily thrown off by my response, but he quickly regained his composure. We don't have time for games, he muttered. Just as the tension hit its peak, something unexpected happened. A sharp sound from outside the room broke the standoff, and both figures froze, their attention diverted. In the blink of an eye, someone else burst into the room, and the dynamic shifted completely. I barely had time to process what was happening, but one thing was clear: this wasn't over yet. The woman wearing a hoodie. What the hell was she doing there? Why was she holding a gun with a silencer? Why did each of the men have exactly one fresh hole in his head? How were we supposed to clean up the bed and the carpet? Why did she suddenly appear so incredibly attractive and professional? My brilliant summary of all those questions was simply, what? What? She replied. I sensed she was enjoying this exchange and was willing to keep it going for a while. Once again, my lack of eloquence was probably impressing her. Good to know. She couldn't fully conceal her smile. What? You already said that, Einstein. What's happening here? Finally, a complete sentence. A fair question. They're dead and you're alive. Do you have any thoughts on that? How could she be joking in such a situation? I do. It would be unfortunate if the roles were reversed. See, that's why I'm here. Have you ever done anything like this before? You mean saving clueless morons? I had to laugh, which felt somewhat inappropriate given the serious situation. I could feel the adrenaline fading and my muscles gradually relaxing. No, I mean, killing two guys who were about to execute an eloquent, innocent man. Now it was her turn to laugh. My dear, you are neither eloquent nor innocent. That might be true, but still, why did you save me? It's my job, she replied, producing an official-looking badge. The most prominent features were the 3 large letters F, B, and I. Wow, the government had saved me? Why would they bother? Did they need a vending machine technician for some secret government mission? Why is saving me part of your job? I asked myself the same question repeatedly. Why couldn't I have learned to be something useful? Like a plumber, woodcarver, pilot, teacher, anything. I wouldn't have to kill idiots to save other idiots. I had to laugh again. No, I mean, why save me specifically? Oh, I could tell you, but I'd have to kill you afterwards. That wouldn't make any sense, right? Probably not, and I'd rather avoid dying today. All right, buddy, you need to help me. We need to clean up this mess. How? This is gruesome. Their brains are on the walls. Don't overthink it. It's just matter in the wrong place. We just need to relocate it to a more appropriate spot, like a nice, cozy landfill. Okay, tell me what to do, I responded, wondering why a government agent had to handle such a cleanup. Shouldn't they call someone trained for this? You have that ugly old Corolla, right? Hey, how is that possible? She just laughed, and seemed to understand what I was referring to. Nobody had ever noticed my car. I'm a mutant. I can see invisible cars. And invisible people, it seems. Oh, you're anything but invisible, trust me. You just don't realize how all the women around you are watching. You're very attractive, yet not arrogant. I appreciate that in a guy, okay? Seriously? Doris had always made me feel like I was pretty average. I began, unsure how to respond to a compliment from a stunning woman. Yeah, I have this old Corolla. What do we need to do? We need some plastic wrap, brushes, and detergent. We also need to steal a set of bed linens from the room service to replace these. All right, let's go. It felt good to have something to do after weeks of waiting. We hung the "Do Not Disturb" sign on the door and set off on an unexpectedly enjoyable shopping trip. Why exactly am I the one scrubbing their brains off the wall? I asked. Because it's been put on the wall to save your life. True, but you were the one who put it there. I knew I was going to lose this playful argument, but it kept me from wringing the bloody rag into the bucket once more. She sighed in a way that should have reminded me of Doris, but it somehow didn't. I should have shot you instead. I bet they wouldn't mind removing you from the wall, she replied, while finishing to wrap the guys in plastic. I wondered how we were supposed to carry them out of the room. We had to hurry. Eventually, the room service staff would ignore our sign. True, but they might have shot you afterwards, fake FBI badge or not. She couldn't hold back her laughter anymore. I realized I liked it when she laughed. I guess I can't fool you, huh? Too bad that thing is a master forgery and only cost me $5 at the novelty shop. You should have spent that on some cheap glasses. Handsome guy, my ass. That's for me to decide. I already know you don't particularly like yourself, but I happen to disagree. That silenced me for a moment. Was she serious or just teasing me? A woman like her couldn't really be interested, right? Maybe she just needed my help getting rid of those idiots? No. For some reason, I trusted her. A few hours later, the room was spotless. I guessed it was now the cleanest room in the entire hotel and hoped the room service wouldn't notice. The unnamed dream woman and I were busy trying to mimic a cliché crime movie by carrying a corpse wrapped in plastic down the stairs of a cheap hotel late at night. Of course, I was handling the upper body and failing miserably. Hey, he's too heavy. Can't we just slide him down the stairs? She seemed to ponder for a few seconds. His head will hit the stairs and wake everyone up. I can hold his head up. Okay, let's try it. I found myself in the odd situation of holding the head of a dead guy who had tried to kill me earlier, while his body was being dragged down the stairs by the beautiful woman who had saved my life. A few weeks ago, such things weren't a regular part of my life, but I was starting to enjoy the new version of myself. I could do without those near-death experiences. It turned out the average mafia hitman was too large for a Corolla trunk. Somehow, the Toyota dealer had omitted that crucial piece of consumer advice. We had to fold down the rear seats, but the wrap tore open as we struggled to move him in the most undignified way. His lifeless eyes watched us work with silent accusation. That went well, I think, I concluded, after slamming the hatch shut. We both had to laugh. Yeah, we were pretty smooth. Let's dump him and try to do better with the second one. Practice makes perfect. Around 5 a.m, we both collapsed into my bed, utterly exhausted. I was too tired to be surprised when I felt her head on my shoulder. We just fell asleep immediately. That night, I learned that crime can be hard work. Like most days lately, when I had nothing else occupying my time, I found myself staring at her intently. It didn't matter what she was doing, which was minimal at the moment, mainly just soaking up the sun. Well, not entirely, since we were at a hotel pool once more. She had persuaded me to relocate to a nicer spot, and since I was fed up with the lousy lake, the rundown hotel, and the endless conversations with the innkeeper, I didn't resist much. She appeared largely indifferent to everything, and some of that attitude seemed to influence me as well. Whenever I wasn't too distracted by admiring her, which she never seemed to object to, I kept wondering who she really was and why she was helping me in the first place. However, I never dared to voice these thoughts. I suppose I feared the answers, or that I might push her away by asking. Honestly, I cherished my time with her too much to disturb the peace. "Why did you save me in the first place?" I suddenly blurted out, breaking my own rule about not asking questions. "If I tell you, will you explain why they wanted to kill you?" "I have no idea." "Then I have no reason to save you." She gave a sweet smile, and once again, I felt like she already knew everything about me and was just toying with me. Did she enjoy manipulating me before eventually killing me? Why did she rescue me in the hotel room then? Was she trying to earn my trust until I revealed where I had hidden the money, which was still in its original hiding spot? How could she possibly know about the money? She would only know if she were a mafia assassin. That didn't make sense. Why would she eliminate her own colleagues? Nothing about her made sense, but she had a sharp sense of humor, was stunningly attractive, and was a pleasure to be around. And of course, there was that unforgettable smile. The intimacy was exceptional. Oh, how incredible it was with Danny. It always was. Sometimes intense and passionate, other times slow and affectionate, and occasionally playful and experimental. It reached a level I had never encountered before. She looked at me with an unusually intense gaze, as if she genuinely appreciated what she was seeing. I couldn't blame her. I probably looked at her the same way. I just couldn't get enough of her, and couldn't imagine a life without her. I knew I'd have to face that reality someday, but I was happy to postpone it indefinitely. The intimacy was fantastic, the love was clearly real, but everything else was uncertain. I guess I must have seemed pretty happy. "Yeah, it's the same for me. I've never felt this way before," she said, after watching me for a while. "Really?" That was the wrong response, and it earned me a semi-loving punch in the ribs. "What, you think I do this all the time? Just so you know, mister, my job has basically turned me into a loner. I might even get less intimacy than you, buddy." "I seriously doubt that. What do you do for a living?" "Saving inept American vending machine technicians for the Uzbek government. It's part of a deal they made with the Pope to appease Greenpeace." We both burst out laughing. "You must have been pretty busy then." "It has its moments. What about you?" "I'm an inept American vending machine technician who needed to be saved." "I know that, you smartass. Why did you need saving anyway?" "Time travelers are trying to kill me because of a vending machine service I'll mess up in the future, which will eventually lead to World War III. "Ah, I see. The usual story." Those conversations were fun, but I was also tired of avoiding the huge elephant in the room. If our relationship was going to have a chance, we needed to be honest. The problem was, I just didn't have the courage. "Move in with me," she said out of the blue. "What?" Damn. She had already mockingly called me the what man. I needed to get rid of that nickname. "Really? I own a big house. I would—" She surprised me by blushing like a schoolgirl. "Forget it. No, I'm honored. You trust me enough to invite me?" "I do," she replied shyly. "Oh my. Of course I'd love to." One evening, we were nestled together by her fireplace. It was one of those flawless moments. She gazed into my eyes for what felt like an eternity. I would have loved to ease the tension by looking away, but I simply couldn't. Turning my eyes from hers had always been difficult, and it became impossible when she stared at me like that. Ultimately, I realized I didn't really want to look away. "Okay," she said plainly, without any further explanation. I could sense she had made a significant decision, though I had no clue what it entailed. "Okay," I replied, hoping she hadn't decided to eliminate me. "Okay," she affirmed. "Good. You're Michael Wilson." "I know. Wait, how did you know my last name? I don't recall ever mentioning it." I'm glad you do. I'm Danny Everson. That's my real name. Cool. Michael Wilson is real too. I'm aware. This was one of the strangest conversations I'd ever had, and I'd had quite a few lately. By all rights, you should be dead by now. I know. You've had a lot of bad luck, starting with your choice of a wife, then having to travel with that terrible suitcase, and not to mention ending up with $3 million in prohibited substances money you never wanted. I was too shocked to respond. She had known everything all along. You're also pretty clueless. You couldn't successfully disappear, even with a suitcase full of unmarked cash. You didn't realize your wife was cheating for a long time. You couldn't even hide the location of your money from me. Wait, of course I do. One of us has to be smart, right? Anyway, you're lucky to be so nice, charming, and incredibly good-looking, or I wouldn't have chosen you as my retirement partner. Wait, what? You heard me correctly. You don't even need to worry about your money. I have much more than you do. That suitcase mix-up turned out to be the best thing that's happened to you in a long time. Okay, now it's getting ridiculous. You'd better stop talking now, since that mix-up is what brought us together. If you know what's good for you, you won't deny it. All right, I admit that's a clear advantage. Still, it's not worth much if we both end up dead. That won't happen. You're now under the protection of a professional. What are you, Danny? Some kind of mafia assassin? I hoped she wouldn't take offense, but she simply shrugged. Not exactly, although it was a tempting career for a while. The best way to describe what I did is a skip tracer. I find people who don't want to be found. And you killed them afterward? No, not usually. I only killed in self-defense if it was unavoidable. There are specialists for that kind of work. Damn. She tracked down people for the mafia and had no problem finding me. Okay, so there will be a specialist waiting for me? No, because I haven't reported you. I've been wanting to retire and was just looking for an unlucky guy to share my retirement with. I'm sorry, but I've chosen you, and there's not much you can do about it. I have you under my spell. I was thrilled, but tried not to show it too much. Instead, I acted as if I was considering her proposition. So, what you're suggesting is that we enjoy our money, stay a happy couple, fall even more in love, and just live life together. Yes, and don't forget lots of intimacy and me keeping you alive. Does that sound like a deal? I guess it sounds better than being shot in the head by Vinny. But only slightly better, I suppose. I ended the back and forth with a long kiss. So, does that mean you accept, Michael? Certainly, I'd have to be the biggest fool imaginable to turn down that proposal. No, don't mention it, I responded, as she began to speak. But still, aren't you a bit hopeful about our odds against the entire mafia? She laughed dismissively. The entire mafia? Come on. Sure, there are some larger groups, but most are just local idiots involved in shady dealings together. In this situation, it's Vinny attempting to branch out from selling stolen goods and wrecked cars into the prohibited substances trade. He borrowed your $3 million from Fat Alberto, which becomes problematic if he fails to repay it. Vinny isn't leading any kind of cartel. At his peak, he only had a small crew. I'm not sure how many are left since he seems to be facing some financial issues. He couldn't even manage to give me my initial payment, which is why I delayed reporting you initially. I don't know how many of his guys remain when he can't pay them. Their loyalty is typically based solely on money. In any case, it's amusing how this all began. Your deceitful wife Doris thought it was funny to purchase the same unattractive suitcase twice, one for her lover and one for you. Naturally, she couldn't have anticipated that such a little prank would result in her own downfall. Wow, was all I could manage. That's intriguing, but also a bit frightening. Why? You know so much about me, even more than I knew myself. What's my zodiac sign? Scorpio, and that's fortunate. Otherwise, I would have had to eliminate you. We both burst into laughter. All right, you're mistaken about that, but it's still unsettling. You know so much about me. while I know nothing about you. Yeah, you're somewhat under my control. That's fine, I can handle it. Control my foot, I retorted, lifting her up and carrying her into the bedroom as she laughed joyfully. Well, figuratively speaking, she added, before I playfully silenced her. Not permanently, of course, but it took us a while before either of us felt like talking again. Really? What exactly do you want to know? She picked up our conversation after a passionate interlude. For starters, your age and your background. Oh, so you're clueless? You never ask a woman her age, which happens to be 32 in this case. Please, as if. I'd describe myself as a freelance operative for the mafia, tempted by my undeniable charm. Yes, a freelancer, but not only for criminals. I've been hired not just by people like Vinny, but also by companies or wives searching for ex-husbands who skipped out on child support, and even by the authorities, she responded, giving me a gentle punch on the ribs. You really should stop mentioning the mafia when talking about him. He's just a low-level criminal, though still dangerous. Good to hear. I'm dangerous too. I won't say it will be easy, but I believe we can handle it, she said, suddenly becoming open, serious, and a bit worried. We will. I'm confident we will, I reassured both of us. A few days later, Danny brought up the issue again. We need to resolve this one way or another. I'm not going to spend my life running away from those jerks and getting caught off guard. We have to confront them, and we should do it on our own territory. I'm not sure. I'm just a vending... She pressed her lips tightly and her eyes flashed as she cut me off. Yeah, a vending machine technician. Stop hiding behind that title. Do you even mean what you say? I'm a loser, and this is my excuse for messing things up again later. You refuse to see yourself as a winner. Doris messed things up. She should have rescued you from your misery, built you up, and given you confidence. Instead, she tore you down, and then was unhappy with the outcome. You, however, are comfortable in that role. It means you don't need to be ambitious, brave, or creative. You can stay on the couch until your life slips away. Saying I was shocked would be an understatement. I thought things were going well between us. It really hurt to hear her true feelings about me, especially since they were completely accurate. I began, but quickly lost my momentum. But I'm not Doris. It doesn't matter whether she took your confidence away or if you never had any to begin with. She could have had a wonderful partner by her side if she had recognized your potential. You're really attractive, caring, and genuinely nice, and I can take care of the rest. I couldn't help but laugh out loud. She was right. It had been blatantly obvious all along. I was a lazy loser. Whenever something happened in my life, others had been driving me. Doris, Vinny, and now Danny. So you want me to stand up against the people who are manipulating me? Absolutely. From now on, I'm the only one manipulating you. She laughed and gave me a big kiss on the mouth. We're going to be equals. That's why I'm asking if we should fight them, so we can live without their threat. All right, so we confront them here at your place? That's my preference. It's secluded, and we can take our time preparing. Okay, cameras, traps, sniper rifles. Exactly, honey. All right, I agree. Let's do this together. She had won the argument, but she was the expert. The important thing was that I had been asked for my opinion. I could get used to that, I thought. How are we going to lure them here? No problem. I know how to discreetly inform them of our location when the time is right. They're here, she whispered, still shaking my shoulder. Huh? Who? I responded, still groggy from being abruptly pulled out of a pleasant dream. What do you think? The milkman? What? Oh, sorry. One of the motion detectors? Yes, at the front gate. I briefly wondered how I had missed the alarm sound. They aren't exactly subtle. All right, let's check the cameras. By then, I was fully awake, but still wished I could return to my dream. Damn, this was serious. Either we or they would be dead by morning, and the outcome depended entirely on our skills. We had prepared thoroughly, but our plan had a major flaw. One member of our team was just a vending machine technician. Okay, I wasn't supposed to think about that anymore, but it was still true. Danny owned a large property, and her house was as secure as any typical home. She already had 8 security cameras around the house. We had taken the time to install 7 more, each with separate infrared lights. Mostly, we placed them where there was power, meaning the entire area wasn't fully monitored. After activating the PC, we had a clear idea of what was happening. They had chosen to use the main gate, which was smart since the area was otherwise quite hard to access. They jumped over the gate, probably assuming it was wired. They were right about that, but we had installed additional light barriers that triggered the alarm. Thanks to the infrared lamps, the camera feed was crystal clear. We saw 2 men, heavily armed but without night vision goggles. One was clearly Vinny, but I didn't recognize the other. "That's Fat Alberto," Danny informed me. "He's the one Vinny borrowed money from." The man on the monitor looked like he had just come from a fitness expo. "How did he even get that nickname?" "I have no idea. Some say he's ex-special forces or something, but I'm not convinced. I think he's always been a petty thug. Still, everyone agrees he's extremely dangerous and ruthless. He might have been trained by people who know their stuff. If he's the one handling the money, why is he here? Oh, he's definitely a hands-on type and rarely relies on others to do his work. I'm not surprised to see him." Meanwhile, they had moved out of the camera view. We still had plenty of time before they reached the house. "Okay, what's our next move?" "Plan A?" She snorted. "Smart ass. As if we had more than one. So yes, let's go with Plan A. Watch their approach and try to stay alive." Our plan was somewhat more detailed than that, but not by much. The 2 of us couldn't possibly cover all the routes they might take to reach us. We would just have to monitor them and respond as best we could. We had run through many scenarios, but agreed that reality would likely not follow any of them. The first deviation was that there were only 2 of them. "Why didn't they bring any cannon fodder?" I asked Danny. "Not sure. I'm a bit surprised too. I was equally shocked Fat Al could come up with 3 million. Maybe that's all he had, or perhaps he borrowed it himself. I guess they can't afford troops anymore." They surprised us by taking the dirt path directly from the gate to the house. We had mostly only covered that route with cameras and other features because they were easy to install there. We hadn't really anticipated them being so straightforward. In any case, it gave us camera coverage again after a few minutes. "There they are!" I exclaimed, completely unnecessarily. "Really?" She snorted. "Wait, they can't possibly be running straight into—" I began, but was cut off by Al stumbling into a hole I had dug earlier. I hadn't expected those traps to work. The area was vast, and I had lost interest in digging after just 12 holes. His stepping into one was like winning a bad lottery. "They did," Danny commented dryly. "Damn, that must hurt." I honestly felt sorry for the guy. He might have come to kill me, but I still winced imagining what happened to his foot. I had once watched a Viet Cong documentary about the traps they built. One was a kind of funnel of downward-angled spikes. That was what held his foot in place, painfully. "You actually feel for that guy?" "No, of course not. Still, my God, that must be gruesome." She suddenly kissed me, briefly blocking the camera view. "Why did you do that?" "To show appreciation for being such a nice, caring guy. He deserves it, but you still feel bad for him. Hey, you even set that trap." "Yeah, that was the one time having a service technician around was really useful, right? I'm pretty good at welding." We could hear Al shouting loudly from afar, even without microphones. He must have tried to pull his foot free, causing the spikes to dig deeper into it. Vinny turned around calmly as the footage showed Al calling for help. Vinny observed the situation but didn't act. "He's assessing the situation," Danny commented. "You don't think—" My thought was interrupted by the scene unfolding. Vinny moved behind Al and made a decisive action that left Al incapacitated. Al collapsed forward, and a wave of nausea hit me. "So far, this has been very direct," Danny remarked in her usual terse manner. "Don't lose focus now. Would you have felt better if you had done it yourself?" "No, of course not. You're right. But why did Vinny do that?" Al was no longer helpful. Vinny likely wanted to avoid complications. "Speaking of Vinny," she added, "things are about to get challenging. He's highly skilled, and now it's about survival. You've dealt with situations like this before, right?" "I've been in dangerous situations, but nothing like this. Vinny is experienced, and that's concerning. Let's move." Vinny had vanished from the camera feed, and we couldn't locate him on any other screens. The moon was full, allowing him to move freely, but I hadn't expected him to notice the cameras. Maybe it was just bad luck. At least the house was fully monitored, and the surrounding area was well lit. "I can't find him," Danny said, her voice a bit tense. She continued scanning the cameras, but he had disappeared. "All right, we need to get into position," she added. "He'll show up soon. Grab your gear and stay alert." We positioned ourselves in opposite corners of the house, each with a rifle and a sidearm, scanning the forest. I stared into the darkness until my eyes ached, but I couldn't detect any movement. During training, we had practiced in daylight, where everything felt more manageable. Now it was dark and unnerving, and the stakes were much higher. This was real. A loud boom shook the house, followed by debris flying down the hallway. He must have used an explosive to breach the door. The explosion plunged the house into darkness, cutting off power. We hadn't prepared for this scenario, and without night vision, the situation became even more dangerous. I strained to hear anything in the suffocating silence. Suddenly, a gunshot rang out, then another. The sound was enough to push me toward the kitchen, where Danny had been. The firing stopped, replaced by muffled noises of a struggle. My first instinct was to stay out of sight, but Danny was in danger. I needed to help. I followed the sounds into the kitchen, where shadows moved in the faint light. It was impossible to tell who was who in the chaos. I could hear the clash of movement, hoping Danny was holding her ground. I steeled myself, knowing we had to survive this together. Once again, there was a dull thud, followed by cries of distress. I needed light urgently. Remembering the flashlight in the kitchen, I carefully made my way there. Feeling around in the dark, I finally found it, a sturdy, metal flashlight. Success. Armed with the flashlight, I felt a surge of confidence. I turned it on and immediately saw Danny on the ground, shielding herself with one arm. Her leg was injured, and she looked exhausted, but alert. Vinny stood over her, holding a heavy object, clearly intending harm. His face was bruised, and he looked furious. "Stop!" I yelled, my voice cutting through the tension. Vinny turned toward me, throwing the object in my direction. Instinctively, I dodged, the flashlight slipping from my grasp. Shadows danced erratically as I scrambled to retrieve it. Vinny's voice was close. He was advancing despite his injuries. I finally found the flashlight, pointing it at him. His expression was twisted with anger, but his movements were slower now. "You don't have it in you," he sneered. "You've never been the type to fight back." I stayed silent, my focus sharp. His taunts were meant to distract me, but I couldn't let them. Then, in the beam of the flashlight, I saw something glint. A second object on the floor, within his reach. Time slowed as he reached for it, but I acted first, pushing it away with my foot. The tension was palpable. "You're done, Vinny," I said firmly. "This ends here." Danny's voice broke the silence. "What took you so long?" she joked, her spirit undimmed despite everything. "You know how it is," I replied, helping her up. "Unexpected interruptions." "Think he'll come back?" she asked, leaning on me for support. "I doubt it," I said with a small smile. "Pretty sure he's had enough for one day." She chuckled softly, even as we hobbled toward the door. "Well, next time, remind me to bring better backup." Noted, I replied, adjusting my grip on her as we stepped into the night. But for now, let's focus on getting you to safety. Her leg was truly broken, just like 2 of her fingers. The others only had bruises and cuts. To me, our story about the biking accident seemed somewhat flimsy, but either the doctor wasn't suspicious, or he was happy to move on to his other patients without bothering to report me to the police. Danny had to remain in the hospital for 5 days, and I visited her constantly. I brought her flowers, candies, and magazines. I was deeply worried she might end our relationship now that the danger had passed. She was just as anxious. She wouldn't let go of my hand whenever I was near her bed and appeared visibly distressed whenever I left to go home. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. Danny, I'm not sure what you're planning to do, but I love you, and I'm not going anywhere unless you push me away. She sighed and visibly relaxed as she pulled me closer. Yes, she whispered with a satisfied smile. Yes? I didn't ask anything. I know, but my answer is always yes. I love you too, Michael, and I'm yours if you want me. Good, good. I sighed, feeling the tension melt away. We stayed like that for a while, simply enjoying each other's company. You can ask the damn question now, she gently urged. What? Don't come at me with a what now, okay? Her playful side was quickly returning. I realized she must be on the mend. Then it finally clicked. Danny Everson, will you marry me? Will you be my wife? She let out a quiet, adorable cheer. I already answered that, but since you're a bit slow sometimes, yes. The answer is always yes. She pulled me in for a warm, wonderful kiss. I'd love to marry you, Michael. Now it was my turn to cheer. What took you so long anyway? She asked, still smiling happily. I knew you were the one for quite some time. My constant self-doubt, I replied. But I'm working on it. I really am. We never really went back to her house. Using my skills, I cleared out the bodies while she was in the hospital, cleaned up the blood, and hired someone to begin the repairs. After our quick Vegas wedding, with her stunning white dress concealing the cast on her leg, we started searching for a lovely place without any bad memories. She said it was the fresh start we needed, and I agreed. I was overwhelmingly happy, and her having more money than me didn't matter. Burying an empty turquoise suitcase was my final, symbolic farewell to my life as an unhappy vending machine technician. We tried to burn it, but the darn thing wouldn't ignite. When Danny finally stopped laughing, she said it couldn't burn because it was too ugly to die, so we had to bury it. Together we dug a hole and threw it in. I bid a last goodbye to Doris because I felt I should, then turned happily toward my beautifully smiling new wife and our new life together.